You know what's even better than drinking a delicious International Delight iced coffee? Winning a brand new car to drink it in. Visit internationaldelightcarsweeps.com for rules and enter through November 10th for your chance to win a new car plus a year's supply of iced coffee. No purchase necessary. Year's worth of product awarded as product and coupons. Valued at $978.20. Open to legal residents of U.S. and D.C., excluding Alaska, Connecticut, New Jersey, Nevada, Hawaii, Tennessee, and Wisconsin, who are at least 18 in age of majority. Ends October 10, 2024. Sponsored by Danone US LLC. For official rules, visit internationaldelightcarsweeps.com.
Welcome to What She Said, the heartbeat of Canadian women's voices, with me, your host, Candace Sampson. Here, we dive deep into the raw, unfiltered stories and triumphs of women from coast to coast. This isn't just a podcast, it's a movement where empowerment and education collide and where mansplaining is shown the door. We're here to celebrate, uplift, and echo you. So get cozy, tune in, and let's embark on this journey together, exploring the rich tapestry of women's lives, their battles and victories, right here on What She Said. Let's face it, on a daily basis, we are inundated with challenging news on every possible front, making it difficult for stories of hope and progress to break through. This week's show aims to do just that by shining a light on individuals and organizations who are making a real difference. We're talking about those tackling challenges head on, innovating in the workplace, pushing boundaries in the medical field, and celebrating creativity in arts and culture. Get ready for an inspiring journey filled with optimism, vital insights, and a reminder that positive change is all around us. We start with Catalyst, a beacon for inclusive workplace practices globally. Amidst a landscape where diversity, equity, and inclusion face scrutiny and challenges, Catalyst steadfastly promotes true equity through research-driven strategies and steadfast advocacy. Dr. Julie Cafley, Executive Director of Catalyst Canada, joins me to provide her expert insights and discuss how Catalyst is making a difference in advancing workplace equity, where the reality on the ground is quite different from what you may be reading in the news. And Brodie is in with new entertainment and will share her insights on some standout films and performances, including her thoughts on Kate Winslet in Lee, which portrays the riveting life of Lee Miller, a woman definitely ahead of her time, and Kathy Bates' fresh take on the classic Matlock series. Highlighting challenges in the medical field, Dr. Chika Oriuwa recounts her experiences as the only Black student in a class of over 250 at medical school. Her memoir, Unlike the Rest, offers a powerful account of navigating and overcoming systemic barriers. Dr. Oriuwa will share her journey, advocacy, and the personal hurdles she has overcome along the way. Concluding today's lineup, Anastasia Minster discusses her latest musical project, Song of Songs. This album is a rich tapestry of noir chamber pop, jazz, and classical music that explores the various dimensions of love. Featuring a 30-piece orchestra and a jazz trio, Anastasia will talk about her creative process and the inspiration behind her work before we listen to the mesmerizing track, Dancing with a Ghost. So join me for an episode filled with enriching discussions and captivating stories designed to motivate and resonate with anyone eager to see positive changes in the world. Catalyst is a global nonprofit that has been at the forefront of creating more inclusive workplaces through research-driven strategies and initiatives. In today's evolving landscape where diversity, equity, and inclusion are increasingly under scrutiny, Catalyst remains committed to addressing the challenges organizations face while continuing to advocate for equity. The conversation around DEI is shifting, with equity often misunderstood or overshadowed. So it's essential to clarify what equity truly means in the workplace and how it differs from inclusion and diversity. Today, we'll be discussing this, along with the concrete actions that organizations can take to ensure DEI remains authentic and impactful, the critical role men play as allies, and the broader equity issues that affect women in sports. Joining me today is Dr. Julie Cafley, Executive Director of Catalyst Canada, who will shed light on these important topics and share how Catalyst continues to lead the charge in advancing workplace equity. Welcome to What She Said, Julie.
Thank you, Candace.
So equity, as I mentioned, is often misunderstood. So can you clarify what equity means in the context of the workplace and how it differs from inclusion and diversity?
Absolutely. I think the whole acronym DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, is actually misunderstood by many people. And so I think we really need to just spend time explaining it. Diversity really means representation. So do you have a diverse representation? Does your executive team represent the employee makeup within your organization? Do you have voices of women at the table, of racialized employees, of other equity deserving groups at the table? How are those voices represented and there, whether it be on boards and executive teams, within groups that you're convening, et cetera? So that's more the representation piece. What's interesting on representation is there's some interesting research coming out that even when we get the representation right, when we get the numbers right, that there are still certain voices that dominate. Mainly, the voices of older white men in particular. So even when you have 50-50 representation of men and women, the voices of men are still being heard more often. So diversity is very interesting. Equity is where there's been a bit more of a debate. And I think it's a really important term to understand. For me, I think of equity as how do you create that even playing field for everyone in the organization. And, the most classic example is around the rise of women or the rise of racialized women in the workplace. We have data, we have research that explains very clearly that people sponsor people who look like them. So they're talking about people who are not in the room who look like them. So the vast majority of CEOs in this country, over 90%, are older white men, realizing it or not, consciously or not, they are sponsoring younger white men within their organization, unless it's purposeful, unless it's intentional. So how are we ensuring that we're building that path to leadership for women, for racialized women, and removing barriers that might be in their way? So equity is really, it's not the same as equality. It's not giving the same thing to everyone. It's really creating that even space and potentially, working more, sponsoring and mentoring high potential individuals who are not necessarily represented already within leadership. And finally, inclusion for me is really a sense of belonging. Do people feel safe at work? Do they feel comfortable to say things that might be uncomfortable to hear? It's a lot to do with, kindness in the workplace and people liking where they like to be. So all of those really have a different dimension and are all really, really important in the workplace experience in particular.
So Catalyst's research shows that organizations taking authentic, and I think it's really important to emphasize this word, authentic DEI actions, see improved employee engagement and retention. So can you share more about the key actions that drive this authentic DEI policy and how they address current challenges?
This is so important, Candace, and it's really research that has resonated a lot, and especially in times of this DEI backlash. When employees view DEI policies as genuine, they're 6 times more likely to say their organization is fair. So that's a huge impact in terms of how people are seeing their organizations. Even more important is they're 74% less likely to experience bias and discrimination. So those are huge numbers in terms of the impact on the authenticity and the genuine nature of DEI policies. The 6 actions, a lot of them are pretty predictable in a sense in terms of what creates a genuine policy, communicating clearly and vocally. And I say a lot to organizations, even if your numbers are bad, even if you have areas of improvement, share those openly, because that really tells a genuine story about where the organization needs to improve. Nobody ever checks their box in terms of DEI and, we're a fully inclusive organization. There's always areas to work on. So how is that being communicated clearly and vocally? How are you building accountability? DEI is like any other function within a business, and it needs to be central to strategy. There needs to be accountability metrics. There needs to be rigor to the work of DEI. Integrity, our leaders following through on DEI promises. We saw a lot of promises made just after the horrific murder of George Floyd. We're nearly 5 years later. Are those organizations, have they actually followed through on those promises? Have they actually done what they said they were going to do? And I think with DEI in particular, leaders talk about it and they know how to say the right thing. Are they actually following up on their word? Ensuring that the DEI efforts are aligned with the organization's mission and values. That seems really obvious, but is not always the case. How do you create transparency? So how do individuals, within the workplace understand what's happening? 93% of employees that we researched recently said it's really important to hear and that their organization is vocal about their DEI efforts. So how do we create transparency around that? And the final point is around the climate of silence. How are individuals comfortable speaking up and speaking out about things that are happening in their organization? Do they feel that safety to be able to potentially criticize up and say things that they think are going on that they're not comfortable with? And that whole climate of silence or of approachability, it really plays a big role in terms of the genuine nature of DEI policies.
And you can't fake this. You cannot be performative about it. And I want to say, because I have 2 Gen Z daughters, and they analyze things at a higher level than I ever would have. So you are not going to pull anything over on this generation coming up. Millennials, Gen Z, they really do have a great radar for this.
And it's interesting, Candice, I've been at Catalyst for 2 years now, and I've seen probably about 5 or 6 CEOs speak really openly, honestly, and with a lot of humility about errors they've committed around DEI. And it's so refreshing, and it goes so far because everybody makes mistakes. These are uncomfortable discussions. Nobody is perfect. And when I see these CEOs share these experiences with such humility, it gives me so much hope, because we're all going to make mistakes. We're all going to say the wrong thing. We're all going to do something that might hurt somebody. We might not be aware of it. And so how are we having that open discussion? It's hugely valuable. And I'm really heartened when I see CEOs in particular who are saying, I messed up there, and I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have said that. I should have thought that through. I should have consulted more. And I think, I think that's a good story to tell.
It is huge. And largely these CEOs are men, which brings me to my next question. Let's talk about the role in men advocating for equity. How can men be better allies in creating more equitable workplaces?
Absolutely. This is a real sweet spot for Catalyst. And frankly, it's one of the reasons I came to Catalyst, because as inspiring and fun as it is to be in roomfuls full of women, I really think that the change needs to happen with men on board and with men in the room. And so we have a program, Mark, Men Advocating Real Change. And it's really an opportunity to just help to undo those biases that exist amongst men and amongst women, and really focus on gender partnership, which is so key to making our workplaces better for both men and for women. And so, some of the data that's come out of that, 94% of men experience masculine anxiety at work. I hear all the time us talking about imposter syndrome for women. We're not focused on that 94% masculine anxiety. They're experiencing it too. And so how do we kind of work our way through that and have open discussions about anxiety in the workplace, frankly? The other thing that's really interesting is we did another research project amongst men. 86% of men recognize bias that was happening in the workplace. Only 31% knew what to do about it, or how to intervene, or how to interact, or what to say, or how to call in or call out when they saw something happening that shouldn't be happening. And so this program really helps to tool men and women with how to kind of gently say, well, have you realized that the language that you're using is different for men or women, or that there's different, just to help uncover those biases that exist. We've all been born with them and raised with them in a really deep manner. And how are we able to undo that? And we have some really inspiring stories amongst a lot of organizations, Enbridge, BMO, CIBC, Chevron, ConocoPhillips, who've done this program from top to bottom within the organization and have had real impact. And what is really heartening as well is the impact that this has had within workplaces, but also within homes, because a lot of course, these men taking this initiative are fathers, brothers, husbands, and realizing the bias that exists within their home as well, and helping to undo that.
You mentioned something there about calling people in and not out. And I attended the Catalyst Honors Conference last year, and that was brought up in one of the speeches. And it really has sat with me all this time, because when we call somebody out, we shame them, we embarrass them, and actually we probably push them further away from finding understanding. And so that whole concept of calling somebody in and being gentle, it really has sat with me. And I love that you said that. I think we really do need to work on that aspect of things.
Well, and I think it's interesting because I think right now in particular, we're in a time that's very polarized, both within Canada and the US. And I think language really matters and language is really powerful. And, sometimes, I can think of situations where I've called things unconscious bias and people have said, well, isn't that just racism and sexism? And I'm like, well, I kind of want to have a little bit of hope that it's potentially more unconscious than conscious. And so I think, how do you unfold that? Sometimes you want to have a discussion, a really important discussion about racism or microaggressions happening in the workplace. And sometimes you really want to talk about a sense of belonging. And, the language is much different in terms of how it makes people feel. And I really feel that in a time of polarization in particular, we need to bring people to the same table. We need to be having these difficult discussions. We've seen workplaces divided over the events of October 7th as an example. How do we just bring everybody together so that they're feeling safe discussing things that are difficult to discuss?
There are definitely some huge issues on the table right now, and we should be, instead of ratcheting things up, we should definitely have cooler heads at the table. Can we shift our focus though a minute to women in sports, because this is a happy thing, I think. Sarah Nurse is your keynote speaker at this year's Catalyst Honors Conference. What are some of the key equity issues specific to women in sports, and how does her work specifically tie into the broader conversation about workplace equity?
Absolutely. For me, in a time of backlash, in a time of difficult conversations, the whole keynote focused on sport equity is really a feel-good story. We have Sarah Nurse coming in as one of the star players in the women's NHL. That whole program in itself has been such a success story for North America. We've seen sold out tickets, immediately. We've seen such pride. And I don't know if you've been to a game, but it's just such an amazing experience for women and men that are celebrating women in sport. We've also brought in Teresa Resch, and of course she is the president of the women's NBA, and Toronto has just been given a team for the women's NBA. So sport equity for me, there's been so many barriers, issues around pay equity, issues around funding, around the prominence of sports, who plays first, who's given more funding, all of, how this works. And you've seen a global movement where men's teams have been saying, we're not going to take the pay raise until our women colleagues are paid the same. You've seen lots of really powerful moves, and, you've seen the changes in elementary school and high school and this energy around women in sport. So for me, it's really a success story of us having done something right. And we're just so proud to be bringing those two stars to the Catalyst Honors stage talking about women in sport equity.
So as organizations face pressures to roll back DEI initiatives, what gives you optimism about the future of this work? And how can leaders stay committed to advancing equity despite these challenges?
Yeah, absolutely. So we support 400 organizations in their DEI strategies globally. We have people on the ground in Canada, US, and Europe. What I see from our supporter organizations is they're more committed than ever before. And there are a couple of stories that are making the headlines and that are in the news. You've got John Deere, Harley Davidson, Tractor Supply Group, who've really rolled back their work, and that's hit the media. The vast majority of organizations that we're working with, those who are going to be attending Catalyst Honors on October 7th, are deeply committed and are doing more than ever before. We have situations, within DEI, work and gender equity has not gone as far as it should. I have a CEO-driven board who said, we cannot take the foot off the gas. There's so much more to do around gender equity. I just came from a 2-day conference this week focused on women in financial services and all that we still need to do to break down those barriers for women in financial services. And there's so many other questions of intersectionality, of race, of those with disabilities, those who identify as LGBTQ. There's so many different barriers that each of those groups are facing. Only 4% of DEI work is focused on individuals with disabilities, as an example. I sat in a room for 2 days with this group of women in financial services, and a woman said to me at the end, I'm deaf. I haven't been able to hear all of this discussion and interact as I'd like to because of that. And, that wasn't even discussed or on the table in terms of barriers that individuals face in the workplace. So we have a lot more to do on this journey to equity, this journey to representation, this journey to inclusion. And I'm really optimistic because I see the leaders that we meet with and the organizations that we work with, and they're more committed than they ever have been, despite the noise.
I have to tell you, I just did a 6-part series with the Ontario government, the Pay Equity Office of Ontario, and I have optimism as well. After doing that series with them, we have work to do for sure, and I think that we have to educate ourselves about where things sit at the current moment, but there is hope. And I also love that the headlines don't match the reality. I think that's really important to hammer home. For listeners who want to get involved or learn more about Catalyst's work, what's the best way for them to engage with your initiatives and resources?
Absolutely. So we in Canada support 200 organizations. Frankly, in terms of corporations in Canada, they can reach out to me, Cafley at catalyst.org. They can go onto our website for more resources. Catalyst.org is our website. They can follow us on Instagram, on LinkedIn, on Facebook even, and find out more about the work that we're doing. A lot of really fantastic research. And I think in that area, we're a very research-driven organization, and it really matters. And I think, a lot of DEI work sometimes has been a little bit soft, and it's been focused on good intentions. And I think when you drive this work on data, on research, on what are the realities of the sector through a research lens, it's really, really powerful in terms of advancing concrete.
Julie, thank you so much for joining me today. This was incredibly enlightening, and I hope that people listening have walked away with what I've walked away with, which is a real sense of hope for the future of DEI. So thank you again.
Thank you, and thank you for all the great work that you're doing, Candace. Really grateful.
Hi, I'm Michelle Datis, host of Maverick Makers. Every week, I'm meeting entrepreneurs and intrapreneurs who are making it happen. These bold thinkers are taking big risks, are trailblazing the way in their industries and lives, and are changing how things are done or made. You will learn about their journeys, their lessons learned, and their biggest Maverick moves to date. Listen to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or at maverickmakerspodcast.com.
Okay, now for the lightning round.
I'm so good at lightning rounds. That's from Friends. It's my favorite show.
20 seconds on the clock starts now. Who is the captain of the USS Enterprise?
Oh, crap. Is it, Captain Stubing? No, Morgan? Crunch?
Next question. Which superhero is Tony Stark?
Stark. Did Game of Thrones have superheroes? I only watched 2 episodes.
What planet were Luke and Leia born on?
Planet Fitness?
Oh, time's up. Sorry. And now, a word from our sponsor.
Hey everybody, Mandy Kaplan here. Please check out my podcast, Make Me a Nerd, where each week an incredible guest tries to baptize this mainstream mom into the world of sci-fi, fantasy, and all things nerdy. Available wherever you podcast.
That's our show, folks.
Wait, I just thought of it. Padme Amidala gave birth to her twins Luke and Leia on Polis Massa. No, that's dumb. Is it Planet Hollywood?
It's time for Saturday Night at the Movies with Anne Brodie, and we're diving in first with the very powerful Lee, starring Kate Winslet.
Kate Winslet is such an amazing actor, in my opinion, because she can tackle any subject, any genre, and just glow off the screen and draw you into what she's doing. So the character she plays in Lee is Lee Miller, a former New York model who led the high life in New York and then Paris and was Man Ray's lover and muse and all this stuff. Very glamorous. Well, she was more interested in photography. And finally, when World War II rolled around, she decided that she was going to be in on it, that she would report with her photos. And Vogue actually hired her to do that. So, I mean, it doesn't kind of make sense really, but there you go. So she got an amazing collection of photographs in actual battlegrounds. She got into the battlegrounds when no women were allowed. Soldiers, where they lived, how they lived. And then she got into the concentration camps that were liberated. So what a collection she had. And it doesn't really glamorize this woman because this woman was not glamorous. She was heavy set. She had no idea about grooming. Her hair was never combed. And Kate looks just like that here. And freakily, she looks a lot like her. So I often wonder if that is sort of a reason why directors choose certain actors. Doesn't seem like a good reason, but it may sort of be part of the process.
What struck me watching this, Anne, was that Lee Miller is a very strong female lead, obviously, but what the era that this happened in, would be quite unusual to be this outspoken and independent. And then we've got Kate Winslet playing her, and Kate Winslet, I don't know if you've ever heard her.
She's
her in real life. She is so empowering. I think it's kind of a perfect fit, really, to have her be playing Lee Miller.
It is a perfect fit.
Yeah,
and I just think that I hope she continues to do all these meaningful roles, and that she is allowed to play strong women as time goes on. But I mean, it's sort of a standard biopic, but she really raises it up. And I salute her for that. I just think that Winslet is, and I've interviewed her since she was a teenager, and she's so radiantly beautiful. And she's so restrained in that way in Lee. And I think it's inspiring for us. So there you go. It's well worth seeing. It's in theaters today.
All right. Fantastic. Daytime at Revolution just seems interesting to me.
Oh, this is so much fun. So the Mike Douglas show was a daytime sort of namby-pamby talk show. I mean, he got great guests on. He was very laid back and cool, but he sang all these saccharine love songs on the show because he was also a singer. But he decided to play it dangerously. And he accepted John Lennon and Yoko Ono's idea to come on the show to co-host for a full week. So, it was perfect for both of them. John and Yoko got to spread their message of peace, love, the anti-establishment thing. And of course, he gained 40 million viewers a day.
Wow.
For 5 days straight. So now among their guests, and Jerry Rubin, who actually scared Mike Douglas, he was frightened of him, the great, radical, was a guest, along with Black Panther chairman Bobby Seale and Ralph Nader, who was a whistleblower, corporate whistleblower, and George Carlin, whose comedy was way off base for most people. Very blue, very political. And then they also had people like a macrobiotic chef, and they did a biofeedback experiment, very new age. And it worked for everybody. And the thing about it is that Lennon is so comfortable and he's so ordinary. And here he is, one of the biggest stars in the world and a Beatle. And he's just sort of sitting there strumming on his guitar, chit-chatting with Yoko and Mike Douglas and whoever the guests were. And it was the real sense of ordinariness. He was funny and amusing and warm, really warm. And Yoko didn't say much, but she certainly had that singing voice when they performed live with Chuck Berry. So it is pretty darn good. And what you learn at the end of the film, which is a documentary on these 5 days, is that the White House under Nixon, started a war against John and Yoko 2 weeks later.
Oh, interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah.
All right. I have to catch that. I do want to move on, though, because I really want to talk about this last one. I am excited to watch this. Matlock with Kathy Bates.
Oh, it's fantastic. I've been waiting and waiting for this. I love Kathy Bates. I love the fact that a 76-year-old woman is the lead in a TV series, in a mainstream TV series. And I really used to enjoy Matlock. And although it has basic differences, it's still someone who's very kind and sweet and lovely, but really has an eagle eye on people and is a keen observer and can solve problems. So the way she's hired is really fun. I'll just mention this quickly. She goes into this law office and demands work because she's a lawyer and she needs work. And they say, "Are you kidding me?" And then she says, "And I need this much pay." Then I said, "Oh, please, lady, enough." Well, another lawyer comes in and raises a legal question about one of her cases. Bates listens for 30 seconds, solves the thing for her. So she's hired on the spot. But, it's just a very winning, comfortable, kind of lovely show. And I'll tell you this for when you watch, there's a huge twist at the end of episode 1.
Well, the trailer actually sort of amused me watching it because at one point she says, when women get to a certain age, they become invisible, which makes us perfect
Visible.
for listening in on conversations where people are not expecting us.
Yeah.
I really love that she plays with that.
She knows who she is. It's a lovely character.
Where is that playing?
That is on CBS Sunday night. So this weekend is the second episode. But I'm sure you can catch the other one online.
All right, Anne, thank you so much. And we will see you next week.
Well, thank you, Candace. See you then.
We've all heard stories about how difficult medical school can be, the sleepless nights, intense pressure, and the never-ending study schedules. But imagine doing all that while breaking barriers as the only Black student in your class of over 250. That's the story of Dr. Chika Oriuwa, who has not only made her mark in medicine, but became a role model for countless others, earning recognition as one of Time Magazine's next generation leaders. Her new memoir, Unlike the Rest, is a powerful reflection on overcoming systemic barriers, the importance of representation, and finding one's voice in the face of adversity. Chika joins me today to discuss her journey, her advocacy, and the personal challenges she's faced along the way. It is so good to have you back on the show, Chika.
It's so great to be back, and I'm so excited to be able to chat with you today.
Well, the last time you were here, we were discussing the Barbie doll that was made in your likeness, which I loved. And so your memoir, Unlike the Rest, is deeply personal. So can you share what inspired you to write this book and why now felt like the right time to share your story?
So what's really interesting is that when I was in my third year of medical school, I was actually approached by an editor at HarperCollins who was my first editor with this book. And he had heard my story and read a few of my articles, listened to a bit of my poetry, and he thought I would be a brilliant writer for a memoir. And I'd always wanted to write a book ever since I was a little girl, but I always thought it was going to be a piece of fiction and not nonfiction, and especially not a story about my life, but being someone who has just been a lifetime lover and admirer of words and language, it was only natural that I would take up this offer and did so incredibly happily. And with respect to the timing, so I've been writing this book over the course of the last 3 years of my maternity leave. And it felt like it was the perfect time to finally bring it to life because I felt like there was this natural bookending of this chapter of my life, no pun intended, having finished medical school and now being in residency. And it felt like it was an opportunity for me to look back on reflection in what was such a critical time in my life, but also being able to create something that I can not only give to my children, which is the story of my life and how rare of an opportunity is that, but to also be able to give it out into the world for individuals, especially the younger generations who are looking for something that is accessible, tangible, and just a body of work that can be a piece of advice for how to navigate this world.
And as I mentioned in the intro, you were the only Black student in your entire medical school class. What was that experience like, and how did it shape your approach to medicine and advocacy?
So, in a nutshell, and I do talk about this much more in depth within my book, but in a nutshell, that experience for me was incredibly impactful. It is this really complex web of emotions in which being in that unique position definitely spirited me towards this cause of advocacy to really address equity within the medical institutions. It opened up this beautiful door of advocacy and other kinds of exploration for artistic expression as well. However, it was an incredibly challenging time in my life, navigating the circumstance where I'm juggling such an intense academic load as a medical student, but also concurrently pursuing my master's of science in healthcare systems and innovations. And so trying to juggle all of these competing demands while being in this situation that at times felt like it was a direct challenge to my mental health was something that was incredibly challenging. And of course, needing to confront different kinds of micro and macro aggressions, both being a woman in medicine, but also being a Black woman in medicine. It was just a very interesting experience and one that I explore much more intimately within my book, unlike the rest.
And your book touches on the pressure you faced, not only from your studies, but from your family and yourself. And so how did you balance these high expectations with the struggles of systemic racism in your journey?
So it was really, really daunting at times, the amount of pressure that I was under, both internally, just intrinsically having this pressure on me to perform well in medical school, but also having the pressure, from my family, which is well-intentioned to support me, but for me to reach a certain level of excellence, but while doing so, while meeting some of the more corrosive forces of, systemic discrimination. And so for me, what kept me well and what kept me pushing and moving forward was ensuring that I was able to vulnerably lean on the networks of support that I had. And I had a brilliant community of support at the University of Toronto. I had excellent mentors, and I want to name them because they deserve to be celebrated at this moment as well. Dr. Onye Noram, Dr. Lisa Robinson, who's now the Dean of the Faculty of Medicine at Temerity Medicine, and Dr. Pierre Bryden. And I speak about these incredible women who are, two of them are Black and one of them is white, Dr. Pierre Bryden. And I think they really illustrate for me the importance of support and network coming in different forms and shapes, but nevertheless being so incredibly impactful. And so I thank so much of my support network, including these women, but also my friends and family. They have really supported me throughout this journey and kept me moving forward.
One of the most moving aspects and a little bit surprising to me of your story is how you used spoken word poetry to cope with the pressure of medical school. Can you share more about how that creative outlet helped you during these difficult times?
So poetry comes as natural to me as breathing. And what's interesting is that when I write poetry, I actually feel like more of a conduit or a channel than an actual writer, because sometimes these stanzas will just come into my head in complete form and I just have to grab, my journal or grab my phone and jot it out, almost like if I don't do it immediately, it's just going to vanish. And so that's how most of my poems have actually come into fruition. It just kind of pops into my mind, and the stanzas are completed with cadence and even the ways that I would perform it artistically and theatrically on the stage. And so when I was going through medical school, I just had so many experiences when it felt like the emotions were so high and sometimes my morale was quite low. And naturally, my mind would just kind of do its thing in a very self-protective and therapeutic way. And the poetry would just flow out of me. And that was not only a way for me to cope and process the experiences that I was having, but it was also a way for me to advocate. And so taking my poetry and giving life to it on the stage and in the news and media in different ways was really just the most organic way for me to show up in the world.
And we touched on a little bit at the top of this interview. You've been recognized with incredible honors, including having a Barbie made in your likeness. How does it feel to be a role model for young Black girls and women, both in medicine and beyond?
To me, it's so incredibly important. I mean, representation, we cannot overstate the importance of representation. But what I think is really beautiful when I think of the role model opportunity for all little girls is that, as women, but especially as little girls as young as 5 years old, we already have self-limiting beliefs as to what it is that we can do in this world. And so being able to be that role model and show up and show them that you can truly be anything, that to me is the ultimate responsibility that I had as a role model. And I still carry that belief with me. I feel like I show up in the world with that belief as someone who is now a mother. When I was originally doing the Barbie campaign, I was 5 months pregnant with my son, and I now have two beautiful little kids. My son Eze is 3, my daughter Nkiru is 15 months. And so being able to look at them and truly live out that inspiration as a mother, as a doctor, as a public speaker, as a poet, and now as a published author, I think it just demonstrates through this campaign, especially with Barbie, that we can truly do anything. And what a beautiful thing that is.
In your memoir, you mentioned the risks of speaking up in a field where silence can sometimes feel safer. What advice would you give to others who may feel hesitant to advocate for change in their own industries?
What I would say is that, what I have learned is that never underestimate the power of your voice. And even if it is as loud as a roar or as quiet as a whisper, use your voice, because you can advocate for yourself, you can advocate for your peer, or you can advocate for an entire community. And you'll never know the power of your voice unless you use it. And so that is what I would say to someone who is contemplating whether or not to speak up. And, silence, of course, can be incredibly protective for some individuals. But I found that for myself, my silence didn't necessarily protect me in the ways I thought that it would. And that speaks, very much to the quote by Audre Lorde, "Your silence will not protect you." And I know that for me, that was definitely the case.
As someone who's been both a doctor and an advocate for systemic change, what do you believe are the most pressing issues we need to address in healthcare to make it more inclusive?
I will say this from an incredibly biased standpoint as someone who is a psychiatry resident, but I think we cannot overlook the real impact of mental health in our community, in our world right now. When we're thinking about some of the foremost causes of disability in our world, it really does tie back to mental health and mental wellness. And I'm so proud of the advances that we have made in healthcare and beyond to actually acknowledge mental well-being, especially since the pandemic and us coming out of the pandemic. I think there's been a lot of focus on mental wellness, but I do think that the conversations need to continue to be as rich, need to continue to be as impassioned for us to make real headway. And that also, includes in medical school, the way that we talk about the specialty of psychiatry, the way that we want to prop it up and really encourage medical students to go into it, because there is such a dearth of psychiatrists in our communities, especially psychiatrists of color. And so it's so incredibly important to try and uplift individuals who are doing the work in this field.
What's next for you in terms of advocacy, and how can listeners support the work that you're doing?
So what's next for me? I mean, it's a big question. I feel like I have so many big dreams. I am a dreamer. And of course, I want to go back and I will go back and finish my residency. I have quite a few years left, but I plan to specialize in neuropsychiatry and maybe even forensic neuropsychiatry. I find it so incredibly fascinating. I'm really passionate about that. I have this book, and God willing, I'll have another book, and I'm really excited to continue writing because, like I said, it's as natural to me as breathing. Of course, being a mom is my number one job, and it's the most important thing I'll ever do. But with respect, particularly to my advocacy, I think continuing to do the work that I do through public speaking, especially going into different spaces and places and talking about the importance of human connection, the importance of authentic leadership. That is how I'm really excited to show up in the world right now. And of course, continuing to be a representation of the endless abilities and the endless brilliance of, Black women in the Black community, and being a role model for that and a representation of that. So that's what I'm really excited about right now. And in terms of how I can be supported, I think first and foremost, of course, is being able to support the book, unlike the rest of Doctor's story. And if one has the capacity to purchase it, of course, that would be so incredibly appreciated, and I'm endlessly grateful. But also, libraries are an incredible resource. Even going into your local library and asking them to order it so that you can, lend it out and borrow it and read it and return it. That is also a brilliant way to support them, to support the message as well. And so in any capacity, being able to support the book would be incredibly grateful.
Do you have a website and social channels where people can keep up with you as well?
Absolutely. So my website is www.drchikaoriuwa.com. That's DRCHIKAORIUWA.com. And that's a mouthful.
Thank you, because I was struggling with this in the beginning, as we all know.
It's a lot of levels. And then as for my social channels, it's at Dr. Chika Oriuwa. So same thing, DRCHIKAORIUWA.
All right. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Chika. It was just a delight having you back on the show.
Thank you for having me. It's been so wonderful chatting with you, and I can't wait to be back on in the future.
Anastasia Minster, a Toronto-based singer, pianist, and composer, has just released her latest album, Song of Songs, a conceptual work that explores the many facets of love. Featuring a 30-piece orchestra alongside a jazz trio, the album is a beautiful blend of noir chamber pop, jazz, and classical music. Today, we'll dive into Anastasia's creative journey, the inspiration behind Song of Songs, and later on, we'll treat you to her haunting track, Dancing with a Ghost. Welcome to What She Said, Anastasia.
Hi, Candace, and hi, everyone. So lovely to be here.
So your musical style blends noir chamber pop with elements of jazz and classical music. How did your journey as an artist lead you to this very unique sound?
Yes, well, first of all, I consider myself an audiophile, so I listen to a very wide range of different music. And I also love exploring rare genres and even avant-garde music. And yes, so when I started writing my own songs, I was also exploring the genre and my musical expression. And jazz and classical, I think it comes from, first of all, my early childhood experiences. I was exposed to classical music from a very early age because my parents were encouraging me both to listen to music and also to collect records. So my very first record, I was about 5 or 6 years old, was Swan Lake by Tchaikovsky. And it made such a profound impact on me that I think the classical music stayed with me until this day. And then the jazz came a little bit later because in my early 20s, I was at a jazz college. So I was listening to jazz music a lot and, of course, singing it. So yeah, I guess somehow gradually all this music influenced me, and I ended up with this quite interesting genre. I call it noir chamber pop.
And your new album, Song of Songs, is inspired by the biblical poem of the same name. So can you share what drew you to this ancient text and how it influenced the creation of this album?
Sure. Yes. So I have a deep interest in philosophy and religious philosophy as well, and mysticism. And especially when I was younger, I was exploring that a lot. And reading a lot of texts. And at some point, I read Song of Songs. And the first impression that I had, it really struck me how beautifully poetic it is, just the language and how it speaks about love. And then I was also reading about different interpretations that it can have. So it can be interpreted literally, that it's a dialogue between two lovers, but also it can be perceived as a metaphor. And then this is actually a dialogue between God and a human soul. And that really, really blew my mind. And I see Song of Songs as the ultimate hymn to love. And this is what I had in mind when I was creating my album as well.
And you worked with almost 40 people on this project, including a 30-piece orchestra. So what was the experience like managing such a complex project from start to finish? And how did you maintain your artistic vision throughout?
It was an absolutely incredible experience. Very, very complex project, like you said, absolutely. It was actually very challenging for me, first of all, because of the unprecedented amount of work, but also just the number of roles that I had to play in this project. So I had to take care of so many things, starting from, of course, creation, songwriting, recording, being a recording artist and performing the songs. And then also all the logistic, organizing everything, catering, like making sure that people are going to have the food and when it comes, when the videographer is coming and photography, all of those things. It was just incredible. So yeah, it was quite challenging, but I did push through and somehow I managed to do this. I still can't believe that it is all done, and I'm very happy with the result. I think it's really worth it.
It really is incredible. And before we play Dancing with a Ghost, can you tell us a little bit about the story behind this particular song and what it means to you?
Yes, absolutely. Song of Songs can be interpreted differently. Of course, I would like the listeners to just have their own interpretation. But what I had in mind is I was exploring the dark side of love when I was writing the song, and in particular, the attachment trauma and chasing a love or a partner that is unattainable for us. This kind of love that keeps slipping away and we keep chasing it. And this is a partner who's never really there for us, never fully can meet our emotional needs. So it's a ghost of sorts.
So before we play Dancing with a Ghost, then, can you just share with everybody where they can find your music and where they can connect with you on social media?
Yes, absolutely. My music is available on all streaming platforms. You can just Google Anastasia Minster on the streaming platform of your choice. And then please follow me on Instagram. It's Anastasia Minster as well. It's very straightforward. Yeah, and also for people who use Bandcamp, I'm very active on Bandcamp. I have all of my releases there, and I'm going to have new merch soon. Beautiful vinyl and limited edition CDs as well.
All right, wonderful. We're going to close out this week's show listening to Dancing with a Ghost from Anastasia Minster.
Darker than the void. sparks in your eyes. Dance and I wait. The morning looms as you slip out of my arms and fade. I see eyes of blue. Were you really slip out of my arms and fade? I see eyes of blue. Were you really there?
If today's podcast resonated with you, spread the word and share the inspiration. Don't forget to hit subscribe on What She Said across your favorite podcast platforms. Crave more? Join my vibrant community by signing up for my newsletter at whatshesaidtalk.com, and let's get social on Facebook, Instagram, and X at What She Said Talk. Dive into my world a little deeper on TikTok and Threads at Candace Said. And for those who love the airwaves, catch me weekly on 105.9 The Region, Blast the Radio, and 107.7 Pulse FM. Until next time, keep making waves and remember, your voice matters.
The Sound Off Podcast. The show about podcast and broadcast is now in its 9th year. Over 400 episodes with stories from the world of radio, television, voiceover, and podcasting. Over the years, the show has evolved. Most recently, we've added video. So find us on those social media channels that carry video. And you can always listen to the show the way it was meant to be.
The Sound Off Podcast. Hit the follow button on your Apple, Spotify, or Amazon Music app. Or go to soundoffpodcast.com.
I'm Andrea Askowitz.
And I'm Allison Langer. And we are the hosts of Writing Class Radio, a podcast, but we are so much more. We have writing classes. So if you are looking for live online classes where you can join a community, write to a prompt, get feedback, and get better, check out all our classes at writingclassradio.com.
And listen to our podcast wherever you get your podcasts and at writingclassradio.com.
Another Sound Off Media Company podcast.